My life in Oakhaven had always moved with the steady, predictable rhythm of a well-maintained clock. Dependable, quiet, and absolutely the same, day after day. The salt-laced air, the familiar scent of the local market, and the constant soft roar of the waves, these were my anchors. They were the reassuring facts of my existence. I worked in the local library, a job I cherished because it involved organizing the lives of fictional characters, leaving my own safely untouched. I preferred the quiet company of forgotten authors to unpredictable people. I lived in the small timber-framed cottage my grandmother had left me, situated just 2 blocks from the edge of the unforgiving coastline. Every evening, before the 7 o'clock chimes rang out from the old church tower ritual I adhered to religiously, I would lock the back door. My meticulous routine was more than just habit. It was a carefully constructed shield against the one thing I truly dreaded: change. I was 27 years old, and my deepest, most agonizing fear was the unknown, anything that dared to disrupt the perfect established order I had built. This fear manifested most intensely in my relationship with the sea itself. I never went near the docks after sunset. The vast, black expanse of water, stretching out into nothing, whispered promises of disruption and loss, all the things I desperately wished to avoid. I had been content to live comfortably in the shadow of my past, deeply convinced that stagnation was the truest form of safety. That Tuesday evening, however, the silence I prized so much was ripped apart. It wasn't the usual screech of the gulls, or the familiar howling of the wind, but a sharp, high, crystalline chime that seemed to ring inside my skull. I was tidying up the attic storage when I heard it. I paused, every muscle tense, my breath held tight in my chest. A few steps away, lying dusty and ignored in an old trunk, was a tarnished brass compass. It was a family relic I hadn't even looked at in over a decade. Now, it was vibrating fiercely on the wooden floor. More terrifying than the movement was the light. Its heavy brass casing glowed with a soft, ethereal blue. I watched, paralyzed, as the needle began to spin wildly, faster and faster, before it snapped to a sudden, fixed point, straight toward the crashing forbidden waves outside my window. The light intensified, turning the dark wood of the attic into a sapphire hue, a silent, demanding heartbeat echoing the pulse of the ocean I so feared. My heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. No, this wasn't real. I backed away quickly, stumbling over a stack of yellowed papers. My first, desperate instinct was to smother the bizarre object, to bury it beneath old blankets and heavy books, to hide it from sight and pretend the whole impossible event had never occurred. I told myself it was merely a trick of the storm, or perhaps a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. I reached out a shaking hand, intending to grab the compass, but pulled back before I touched the strange heat emanating from it. It was calling, and for the first time since I was a small child, my predictable life had cracked wide open. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that tomorrow would not, could not, be the same. I didn't sleep a wink. The crystalline chime from the compass had been replaced by a low, insistent hum, which pulsed through the floorboards of the attic and into my very bones. I had spent the entire night huddled in the living room, staring up the dusty stairwell, half expecting the ceiling to burst open in a flash of sapphire light. I kept telling myself that when the sun rose, the magic would be gone. The relic would be just old brass again, and I could return to my quiet, well-ordered life. But when the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, I crept back upstairs. The compass was still glowing, though its light was duller now, like a submerged lantern. The needle still pointed resolutely toward the dark, turbulent sea. The logic I used to navigate my safe little world, the rules of physics. The comfort of the routine had absolutely no purchase here. This object was undeniably real, and it was demanding that I break every rule I had set for myself. My fear of the unknown battled furiously with a strange, undeniable pull, a curiosity that felt dangerously close to fate. I knew only one person in Oakhaven who dealt in things that defied routine. Old man Silas. He ran a cramped, cluttered antique shop near the docks, a place smelling perpetually of salt, stale tobacco, and forgotten history. Silas had known my grandmother, and I suspected he knew more about the brass compass and its maritime origins than he ever let on. By mid-morning, I stood nervously on his threshold, the heavy compass clutched tightly inside my jacket. Silas didn't look up from polishing a cloudy telescope when I entered. "Took you long enough, little librarian," he rasped, his voice gravelly, without any trace of surprise. He motioned vaguely toward a dusty stool. "The sea waits for no one, but you nearly tested its patience. Put it on the counter." I pulled out the compass, and the moment it hit the scratched wood, the blue glow intensified, bathing the room in its eerie light. Silas didn't flinch. He simply ran a gnarled finger over the casing. "This is the call, child," he said softly, looking straight into my eyes, seeing past the library worker and the comfortable cottage. "It seeks the heart of your bloodline. Your grandmother spent her entire life running from this. You've been doing the same. It's a map to the lost labyrinth, and only one of her descendants can activate it fully." He explained, without complicated words, that my life's predictable safety was merely borrowed time. The labyrinth wasn't just a place. It was a curse, a quest, and a choice. It required my attention, and ignoring it would mean slow but certain ruin for Oakhaven. The call had come, and if I didn't go, the sea would eventually come for the town instead. The weight of his words settled on me, heavier than the brass in my hand. I thought of the 7 o'clock chimes, the quiet library, the carefully locked back door. It felt impossible to exchange my bookish certainty for this terrifying, sprawling mystery, but Silas offered no comfort, only truth. "You have the key," he stated, his eyes firm. "It's time to decide if you have the courage to unlock the door." I swallowed, the salt in the air suddenly feeling sharp on my tongue. The choice was stark: remain safe and let others suffer, or step into the darkness. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed the stool back. "What do I do?" I whispered, the words sounding small but resolute. Silas smiled, a rare, tired expression. "You go to the water, where it points. Now." An hour later, I was walking down the familiar pier, but nothing felt familiar. Each step was a battle against my 27 years of conditioning. The docks were treacherous, the waves crashed violently, and I wore nothing but my everyday clothes, holding the humming compass like a shield and a key. The brass felt warm now, urging me forward. When I reached the farthest point of the weathered wood, the needle pulsed, glowing brightest at the dark, roiling water below. I took a deep, shaky breath, closed my eyes, and stepped off the edge of the known world. The frigid shock of the ocean swallowed me whole. I was no longer in Oakhaven. The icy grip of the water was supposed to kill me, or at least deliver me back to the shore, shivering and defeated. But instead of the darkness of drowning, I plunged into a breathtaking, silent void. The freezing shock of the ocean lasted only a moment, replaced by a strange, buoyant warmth. I opened my eyes, expecting the murky harbor of Oakhaven, yet found myself suspended in an immense, glowing cavern of water. The air felt thick, not suffocating, and I could breathe effortlessly. It was an impossible sensation that confused my paralyzing fear with a wave of sheer, terrifying wonder. Massive, shimmering formations of coral and stone twisted upward, reaching toward a non-existent surface, illuminated by the continuous, soft blue pulse of the compass still tight in my hand. This was the labyrinth, and it was terrifying precisely because it was so unlike the predictable, safe world I knew. It was dangerous and stunningly beautiful. My first test came swiftly, demanding an immediate response. A sharp, stinging pain on my leg dragged my attention from the scenery. It wasn't a fish. It was a cluster of razor-thin, phosphorescent threads drifting lazily toward me. They glowed a malevolent green, and where they brushed the strange, vibrant coral, the stone instantly blackened and crumbled. Panic seized me, the familiar, crippling fear of not knowing what to do. I thrashed uselessly, realizing my library-honed knowledge of organization and research was entirely useless here. I tried to swim away, but the threads were everywhere, closing in. Instinct took over, a primal, unfamiliar voice within me. I raised the compass, not knowing why. As if responding to my desperate need, the blue light flared hotter than before, projecting a thin, vibrating shield of energy around me. The toxic, phosphorescent threads hit the barrier and instantly vaporized into harmless smoke. I hadn't used magic. I had simply willed it into existence through the relic. This small victory, my very first act of power in this new world, shook me more than the actual danger itself. My safe world was truly gone, and I had been irrevocably changed. Before I could process the adrenaline still singing in my veins, a shadow detached itself from the immense distant walls of the cavern. It was a figure, vaguely human but impossibly fast, swimming toward me with silent, powerful strokes. My heart leaped into my throat again, fear returning in a fresh, sharp wave. Was this the enemy? Was this the punishment for my delay? The figure stopped about 10 feet away. She was tall, encased in sleek, dark material that reflected the cavern's blue light. And her eyes are brilliant, startling, silvery regarded me with a mixture of annoyance and assessment. She didn't speak with her mouth, but a voice, clear and cold, echoed directly in my mind. "You are late. Too slow, librarian. The sentinels are already aware of your presence." She gestured sharply, toward the ceiling, where several more clusters of the deadly threads were gathering, attracted by the light. "Those are the sentinels' pets," she explained mentally. "They were alerted when you crossed the threshold. If you want to survive the first few minutes in this place, you follow me. Now, move." She gave me no gentle introduction, only a harsh command. I didn't need to ask who the sentinels were. The immediate, rising danger told me everything. I hesitated for just a moment, looking back at the turbulent void where Oakhaven had been, before turning my focus completely to the silver-eyed woman. My past life was a closed book. This was the next chapter, and I kicked hard, following my first and fiercest ally into the dangerous heart of the labyrinth. My silver-eyed guide, who introduced herself simply as Lyra, was not a mentor in the kind, grandfatherly sense of old man Silas. She was a drill sergeant carved from the very stone of the labyrinth. Every move I made, every breath I wasted staring at the hypnotic, swirling bioluminescence, earned a mental reprimand. Her voice in my mind was sharp and unwavering, demanding speed and efficiency. She taught me to sense the shifts in the underwater currents, to distinguish between the harmless, drifting life forms and the deadly, stealthy patrols of the sentinels. I learned more about survival in the span of 1 hour than I had in my entire previous 27 years. We were moving downward now, following a natural, spiraling channel that felt less like a cavern and more like the throat of a monstrous, sleeping beast. The light grew dimmer, and the blue glow from my brass compass became our only reliable light source. I realized Lyra, despite her formidable skill, was protecting me, keeping me on the safer, outer routes. This place was actively trying to consume us, trying to trip us up with optical illusions and pressure changes that threatened to crush our newfound buoyancy. Our immediate objective was clear: the Obsidian Fortress. Lyra explained it was the central hub for the Sentinels, a black geometric structure rumored to contain the key to navigating the labyrinth's core. The very place where the curse originated. Getting there meant passing through the sunken gardens, a notoriously deceptive area. We reached the gardens just as the compass began to spin erratically, flickering between blue and a sickly yellow. Lyra paused, pressing herself against a pillar of jade green stone. "The Sentinels are close," her voice warned in my head. "We must move quickly and quietly through this next section. No light, no sound. Do exactly as I do." This was where my carefully guarded fear, my lifelong dedication to rigid safety, became a crushing liability. As we slipped past a curtain of swaying venomous kelp, I saw something. It wasn't a sentinel. It was a small, ornate, wooden boxer, perfectly crafted treasure chests, settled harmlessly on the sandy bottom. In my old life, such a find would have meant an exciting afternoon of research. Here, it represented an absolute, unnecessary deviation from the plan. My librarian mind screamed, "Stop! Investigate! Don't leave anything untidy." I hesitated for a fraction of a second, an involuntary reflex of my former self, prioritizing curiosity over the present danger. That single moment of pause was enough. Lyra was 10 feet ahead of me when I froze. That instant of stillness broke the rhythm of our stealth. A deep, heavy sonic pulse ripped through the water. It wasn't the Sentinel's immediate attack, but a proximity alarm, triggered by my slight delay. Lyra whipped around, her silver eyes blazing with cold fury. Not at me, but at the rising danger. 3 dark armored shapes, the Sentinels, appeared instantly, materializing from the shadows of the twisted coral. They weren't using the threads. They were coming for us directly. My heart plummeted into a pit of sickening guilt. I hadn't made a mistake in strategy. I had made a mistake in character. I had failed Lyra because I couldn't let go of my old world's need for perfect control. We had been exposed, and it was entirely my fault. There was no time for apologies or explanations. The only path forward now was confrontation. The Sentinels moved with the silent, terrible efficiency of sharks. They were colossal, covered head to toe in dark chitinous armor that seemed to absorb all light, making them look like 3 holes in the fabric of the labyrinth. I was frozen, the metallic taste of pure adrenaline flooding my mouth, my mind uselessly searching for a rule, a precedent, a chapter in a book that explained how to fight armored underwater warriors. There was nothing, just the deafening roar of my own terror. Lyra, however, reacted instantly. She shoved me hard, sending me tumbling behind a jagged piece of crystallized rock, and then she launched herself toward the nearest sentinel. Her movement was liquid fire. She was a whirlwind of controlled force. She didn't have a visible weapon, but her hands and feet were edged with a faint silver light, striking the sentinel's armor with jarring high-pitched clangs that rang painfully in my ears. She was buying me time, wasting her energy covering for the mistake I had made. The sickening guilt twisted inside me, heavier than the water pressure. I knew I couldn't just hide. I focused on the brass compass. The blue light flared wildly, fighting the presence of the darkness. I mentally commanded the protective barrier from before, throwing the energy out like a poorly aimed net. It did nothing to the sentinels, but it caught a loose shard of rock and propelled it forward, a pathetic gesture against their immense strength. My magic was raw, untrained, and insufficient. The tide of the fight turned sharply. Lyra, momentarily distracted by a powerful sonic blast from the second sentinel, was caught. The third warrior, moving with chilling speed, slammed her against the rock face. A shattering crack echoed, and Lyra went limp, sinking slowly toward the floor, the silver light around her body extinguishing instantly. Watching my only ally fall, defeated because of my hesitation, was a worse pain than any physical blow. It was a crushing, absolute failure, the total collapse of my comfortable, protected existence. I had crossed the threshold, only to immediately fail the first person who trusted me. Everything went silent, every sound, every pulse of the compass, drowned out by the noise of my own internal collapse. This was my deserved end. As I stared down at Lyra's still, descending form, something shifted. It wasn't the armor or the water pressure. It was the compass. As if seeking its rightful owner, the relic tore itself from my grip, flying down to rest precisely in Lyra's hand. The blue light, which had been frantic, suddenly steadied, turning a deep, vibrant emerald green. Then, the sentinels stopped moving. They didn't attack. They simply hovered, their dark, blank faces focused intently on the glowing device in Lyra's unconscious hand. It wasn't just a map. It wasn't just a key. It was a beacon. The revelation hit me with the force of a 1,000-pound anchor. My grandmother hadn't been running from the quest. She had been running from the responsibility that came with holding the device. The compass didn't require me to be strong or smart. It required me to be the focus. Lyra was the fighter, the warrior. But the device needed my bloodline. The librarian who cherished structure, to maintain the control, to be the anchor that powered her strength. My perceived flaw, my need for order, was not a weakness, but the source of the compass's true purpose. I had been trying to use it as a shield, when it was meant to be a generator. I lunged toward the nearest sentinel, not to fight, but to distract. I didn't care about the pain. I only cared about getting the device back to Lyra. I slammed my own body against the behemoth's leg. And as I did, I desperately reached out to the compass with my mind, not commanding it, but asking it for power, embracing the chaotic surge of energy. My surrender to the unknown, my acceptance of the chaos, was my first true act of magic. My lunge was not an attack. It was a desperate, ungraceful tackle. I collided with the sentinel's massive leg, clinging to the cold, ridged armor, like a barnacle. The warrior barely registered my weight, but the momentary distraction was enough. I used the tiny sliver of time, the sentinel's confusion over this illogical maneuver, to seize the compass. It ripped easily from Lyra's numb fingers, and the moment it settled back into my palm, the light shifted from emerald back to its intense, focused blue. The three dark figures immediately snapped out of their trance, realizing their opportunity had vanished. The second sentinel lunged. This time, I didn't try to shield myself. I closed my eyes and focused all my mental energy, not on fighting the chaos, but on imposing order upon it. I envisioned the energy emanating from the compass as the perfect, rigid lines of a library catalog, every resource accounted for, every particle in its assigned place. The blue light exploded outward, not as a flimsy shield, but as a sharply defined, expanding sphere of force. It hit the three colossal sentinels with shocking power, sending them tumbling backward through the water, disrupting their silent coordination. "We have to move," I commanded mentally, directing the thought toward Lyra. I didn't know if she could hear me, but I knew I couldn't carry her immense form while maintaining this level of concentration. I used the sustained thrust of the compass's energy to propel my own body and hers toward the spiraling ascent we had used to descend. Escape was our only chance. Direct confrontation was still unthinkable. The journey back was a desperate, heart-pounding nightmare of evasion. The sentinels were immediately on our tail, sending powerful sonic pulses that made the water vibrate agonizingly around us. I kept the compass radiating, using its energy to maintain an accelerating current around Lyra and me, pushing us upward through the twisting channels. I wasn't swimming, I was piloting the current with my mind. As we rocketed past the deceptive sunken gardens, Lyra finally stirred, groaning quietly. She managed to use her own considerable strength to grab hold of my arm. "The fortress," she transmitted weakly. "The fortress. You shouldn't have gone back for me." "I failed you once," I replied mentally, my concentration strained but firm. "Not again. And that wooden box. It was a decoy. Your enemies use my weakness against us." The realization of my past mistake, the paralyzing need to investigate the useless box, burned like acid. It wasn't just guilt. It was a potent motivation. My need for order and structure was now harnessed, used to organize the chaotic energy of the labyrinth itself. I was no longer running from the unknown. I was structuring it. We found temporary sanctuary inside a cramped, dry pocket of air nestled deep within the cavern's ceiling, a tiny, hidden alcove Lyra had prepared as a last resort. I set the compass down and it settled immediately into a steady, reassuring pulse. Lyra's face was pale beneath her sleek suit, and she pointed to a deep, jagged gash on her temple. I didn't know how to treat a magical underwater injury, but I could clean and bind it. While I carefully tended to her wound, using a piece of salvaged fabric, she finally spoke aloud, her voice strained. "That force you generated, it was magnificent. How?" "It's not a weapon for a fighter," I explained, my voice steady for the first time since I left my cottage. "It's a conductor for a librarian. It just needs structure." I knew then that the final plan, the one that would actually defeat the sentinels and secure the labyrinth, couldn't rely on Lyra's brute force or my fear-driven caution. It needed the absolute, controlled synergy of both our strengths, the fighter's skill driven by the anchor's focused power. Our first task was healing, but the second was realizing that the key to victory lay in the orderly deployment of chaos. We spent perhaps 4 hours in that dry pocket, meticulously dissecting every detail of our last encounter. It was the most productive meeting I had ever attended. A perfect synergy between Lyra's tactical instincts and my newly awakened ability to compartmentalize chaotic energy. The compass lay between us, its blue light steady, waiting for instruction. I was no longer afraid of it. I had learned that fear was merely disorganized energy. Structure was power. We were ready for the final, necessary return to the obsidian fortress. The descent this time felt radically different. Where before I had felt terror, I now felt focus. The labyrinth's darkness, its enormous, crushing pressure, no longer felt threatening. It was simply mass waiting to be channeled. I gripped the brass compass firmly, running the required energy through Lyra, cloaking her in a tight, nearly invisible blue aura of protection and speed. Her movements became frictionless, a blur of silver and blue fire. The fortress was even more imposing up close. A jagged tower of obsidian, rising from the deep, utterly silent. The sentinels were waiting, not 3, but 5 of them, arranged in a chilling, impenetrable formation around the entrance. In the center stood the largest one, the commander, whose armor radiated a faint, malevolent red energy, the energy of the labyrinth's curse itself. "Focus on the commander," Lyra transmitted, her voice a whisper of steel in my mind. "I'll break the line. You anchor the shield and then disrupt." Lyra launched herself into the group, a whirlwind of calculated violence. The battle was fast, brutal, and deafening. I stayed back, maintaining the intense mental focus required to fuel her movements, watching the terrifying dance unfold. She fought with skill, but the 5 sentinels were too well coordinated. One broke through, rushing toward me, sensing the power of the compass. This was my final test, the ultimate confrontation with my old self. I saw the sentinel bearing down on me, and for a fleeting second, the old, paralyzed librarian wanted to curl up and hide, but I violently rejected that impulse. I didn't reach for a book, I reached for absolute control. I aimed the compass directly at the sentinel's armored joints. Instead of an explosive push, I envisioned the sentinel's armor not as solid material, but as a complex sequence of connected pieces, a poorly labeled file system. I used the compass to impose a single, sharp command. Disengage. The blue light pulsed, not in a blast, but in a tight, concentrated beam. The sentinel didn't explode. Its legs simply folded, its arms dropping, its massive frame collapsing instantly into a heap of disjointed, useless plating. I hadn't destroyed it. I had merely disorganized its internal structure. Seeing the sentinel crumble like a forgotten sandcastle, gave Lyra the opening she needed. She dodged the remaining 3, charging directly at the commander. Now, with the line open, I focused all my remaining strength on the source of the curse, the commander's radiating red energy. I saw the curse not as magic, but as the final, massive, disorganized section of my library, thousands of unfiled, toxic volumes. With a desperate cry that never left my lips, I forced the compass to categorize, label, and file the entire corrupted energy source into a single, harmless structure. The blue light and the red light collided, not in an explosion, but in a silent, violent snap. The red energy vanished, sucked entirely into the compass. The commander sentinel froze, its imposing frame immediately turning gray, then crumbling entirely into dust. The other sentinels simply slumped, lifeless, their purpose gone. A deep, echoing tremor passed through the entire labyrinth, and the terrifying darkness began to recede, replaced by a gentle, nourishing light. We had won. The curse was catalogued and contained. I stood there, utterly exhausted, the small brass compass, heavy and quiet in my hand, no longer glowing. I was still a librarian, but I had learned how to reorganize a whole world. The silence that followed the commander's collapse was profound. A blessed, enduring quiet that replaced the labyrinth's perpetual hum. Lyra and I didn't speak. We simply sat amid the ruins of the obsidian fortress, watching the nourishing light, no longer threatening, flood the cavern. It took us what felt like countless hours to simply gather our strength. Lyra, stiff and exhausted, finally pointed upward, toward a faint, shimmering vortex. "That's the breach," she transmitted, a hint of genuine fatigue in her mental voice. "The way out. It'll close soon, now that the curse is gone. The journey through the rising current was swift, a final, smooth push. We burst out of the water, not onto the treacherous docks of Oakhaven, but into the quiet shallows of the nearby beach, miles away from my old cottage. The air above the water felt heavy and damp, and the sound of the natural, familiar waves was deafening after the silent world below. I staggered onto the sand, pulling Lyra with me. The brass compass was still heavy and quiet in my hand, no longer a beacon of chaos, but a sturdy container. Old man Silas was waiting for us. He didn't seem surprised, just deeply tired, as if he had been holding his own breath the entire time. He didn't ask what had happened. He only looked at the compass and then at my face, finding a certainty there that hadn't existed 3 days prior. "The town is safe for now," he rasped, his eyes fixed on the device. "But the curse energy, the elixir you carry, it won't stay filed forever. You have to ground it, quickly." The curse had manifested as Oakhaven's deep, constant melancholy, the sense of stagnation, and the fear of the sea that had gripped everyone, including me. I realized the town hadn't been protected by my hiding. It had been infected by my fear. The final act was not to hide the power, but to distribute the learned lesson. I walked directly toward the heart of Oakhaven, not toward the library, but the central town square. I found the largest, oldest oak tree, a silent sentinel that had witnessed the town's entire history. Clutching the compass, I closed my eyes and focused on the energy trapped inside. I didn't want to release the poison. I wanted to release the order I had used to contain it. I envisioned the curse energy flowing down through the tree's roots, into the earth, not as toxic waste, but as perfectly categorized data, a lesson in structure. A warmth spread through the town square, washing away the oppressive grayness. The air seemed lighter, the familiar salt breeze, now carrying a sense of possibility, rather than dread. The profound, aching need for things to always be the same, lifted. I am 27 years old, and my life has fundamentally changed. I still work at the library, but I no longer fear the sunset. I still lock the back door at 7 o'clock, but now the ritual is one of appreciation, not avoidance. Lyra decided to stay in Oakhaven, claiming the town's newfound vibrancy was the most interesting chaos she had encountered. She helps me organize the local historical archives, finding a peculiar joy in cataloging real-world mysteries. My lifelong need for order is now the foundation of my strength and my contribution to the world. I look at the dark sea now, no longer seeing a threat, but seeing the vast, well-ordered universe I now possess the skill to navigate. My story had been a timid pamphlet. Now, it is an epic volume, wide open to the next chapter.